This video is now in session, and a couple of days ago, Democrats in the House passed the For the People Act, or known as House Resolution 1. So, this bill does a lot to reform the election in a broad sense. So, like campaign financing, and as well as the actual election, how to vote, how easy it is to vote, where to vote, the length of polls opening, and first we'll start off, I guess, with what's in the bill, because it's a very big bill. So Vox has an article here outlining just the major parts of the bill. Now, I know Vox is a pretty liberal and biased website, but this part, essentially what's inside the bill, I don't believe it's biased compared to their commentary surrounding this section. So, in terms of voting rights, it creates a new automatic voter registration, which means that you have to opt out of registering to vote when you become 18 rather than opting in. So it becomes much easier for individuals to vote. It also requires at least 15 consecutive days of early voting for federal elections, and then for those poll locations to be open for at least 10 hours per day. This section of the bill is also pretty popular with Americans, and it makes it easier for Americans to vote. They no longer have to wait on election day to vote. They can now go and do early voting at their discretion. It also establishes independent redistricting commissions so that partisan gerrymandering no longer happens in the redistricting of the House of Representatives. If you watched my redistricting policy series, then you'll know that I've said many times that Republicans can win the majority in the House in 2022 just by redistricting alone. So this is what the bill tries to thwart that from happening, and then it also prohibits voter roll purging and bans the use of non-forwardable mail being used as a way to remove voters from rolls. So what this does is try to eliminate Jim Crow-related laws that target black voters and purge voters of color who typically vote more Democratic. It also restores voting rights to people convicted of felonies, and this is a kind of contentious issue. But the majority of Americans agree with this sentiment, especially because a lot of people who are convicted, they are convicted of and go to jail for very minor things, especially those of color, and as a result, they're prohibited from voting just because they were either falsely accused of something, or if they did something pretty minor. So that is in terms of voting rights. Now, in terms of campaign financing, it establishes public financing, that kind of system where it matches a small donor donation. So let's just say I donated to John McCain's campaign. I donated to his presidential campaign and donated $20. Then by this bill, then the federal government would then match that 6-1, meaning that the federal government would give $120 to add it on to my campaign donation. So it'd be $140 in total. Now, this is only applicable to those who meet a certain criteria, and as well as establishes evidence that they prioritize small donor donations. So in total, that $140 from my donation would be close to matching the same amount as like a large donor who donates $200 to McCain's campaign. So that is what public financing does. It doesn't lower the voices and decrease the voice of large donors, but instead it dilutes the voice of large donors by putting more small donors into the system and heightening the voice of small donors. So that is the public financing section, and in our opinion, this is one of the best parts of this bill. And then it also passes the Disclose Act and Honest Ads Act. I will get back to both of these acts later because the constitutionality of both is pretty questionable. But in terms of ethics, it requires the president and vice president to disclose 10 years of their tax returns, and this is mainly targeted towards Trump, who never released his tax returns, and it most likely will not get released unless if the grand jury area of New York decides to try to charge and prosecute Donald Trump for tax evasion or any shady tax dealings. So that's the crux of this bill. There's much more to this bill, and it's a very long bill. So if you want to go read the entire bill or the annotated bill, then there's a great article by the Brennan Center for Justice called "The Annotated Guide to the for the People Act of 2021." So let's talk about pros and cons to this bill. So a lot of voters, they experience two problems when they're trying to vote for a presidential candidate. Let's say that Meghan McCain was up for election as president and I wanted to vote for her. Then I would have to do two main things. I would have to surpass two main barriers. The first thing is I have to register myself to be able to vote. And for many people, that's a pretty tough thing to do because the amount of for some states, the amount of complexity when it comes to registering to vote makes it too great for a few people who are on the fence about voting to actually register to vote. So the first section of this bill creates new automatic voter registration, makes it easier for those to vote, and a lot of it also makes it easier for younger people to vote because a lot of young people usually are not enthusiastic about voting, and they don't now I'm not trying to generalize the entire young population. I am also part of the young population and I'm very enthusiastic about voting, but I'm saying that there are a lot of young people who aren't engaged in politics, and as a result, through the automatic voter registration, it makes them easier for them to say their thoughts and to vote. Now the second barrier to actually voting for Meghan McCain is going to the polls, is taking the time to vote. And currently it takes, for a lot of states, it takes a long time to vote. In the 2020 election, we saw how a lot of places that conducted early voting polls had a lot of people waiting for several hours in order to vote just because of the antiquated voting systems or the lack of people on hand or the lack of hours. So this third part here requires at least 15 consecutive days of early voting, with each poll locations opening for at least 10 hours per day. That makes it easier for younger people and for all people in general to vote. And the more people that who vote in our elections, the better it is for our democracy. And we've seen in the 2020 election how this is not quite one-sided, how it doesn't quite only benefit the Democrats. The more people who vote, it does better Democrats, but we saw in 2020 how even though there were more people that voted, it wasn't the same amount of electoral votes for Biden as it was for Obama in 2008, where less people voted. I think around 66.6% of Americans who were eligible to vote did vote in the 2020 election, and yet Biden won only 306 electoral votes. Republicans gained double digits in the House, and Democrats only gained, I believe, 4 seats. Actually, no, a net gain of 3 seats. So all of that combined shows how Republicans should not be against more people being able to vote. And if you are against more people being able to vote, then you do have to question your policies and your values as a party, because if you have to rely on the Electoral College in order to win rather than the popular vote, then you're essentially saying that you're not being indicative of what the majority of Americans want. So those are the good parts about the bill, and there are a lot of other good parts about the bill, especially the ending partisan gerrymandering. That's a major thing that needs to be revoked. That partisan gerrymandering should not have happened in the first place. But yeah, there are a lot of good parts about this bill. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to state all the good things about this bill, so let's move over to the cons. In terms of the cons, we have a really we really question the Disclose Act and the Honest Act trying to pass both of these bills. they try to increase the amount of transparency that you have of large donors, so that large donors have to reveal themselves when donating to PACs, or the top 5 donors have to have their names disclosed on advertisements. But the constitutionality of both of those acts, passing those, is it's questionable, because what these two bills are essentially saying is that, let's just say I'm a large donor and I'm donating to Jeff Flake. I don't know why I'm bringing up every single Arizona Republican, but let's just say I'm a large donor donating to a PAC that supports Jeff Flake for the Senate. So as a result, then if I'm one of the top 5 donors and an ad releases by that PAC, they have to say my name at the ad, or list my name at the end or the beginning of the ad. So the problem with this is that I could argue that that this is restricting my speech, that this is inhibiting my speech, because I may not be as incentivized to freely express my thoughts and donate to a PAC that supports Jeff Flake. So that's against the First Amendment. That's against the First Amendment and the freedom to speak. And the Supreme Court has established through Citizens United v. FEC that money is speech, donating is speech. So both of these acts combined together are against the First Amendment and thus unconstitutional. So if Senate Democrats changes this, and as well as other parts that may be constitutionally questionable, then we will be in favor of this bill. Now, obviously, the sentiments of the Disclose Act and the Honest Ads Act is really good. It's actively making our funding of campaigns more transparent for small donors and for the majority of Americans. That said, if it goes against the Bill of Rights or the Constitution, then there's no way that it can be passed. So those are the pros and the cons of the bill. Now, in terms of the viability of this bill passing in the Senate, it's dead on arrival. We don't believe that there are enough senators to overcome the filibuster, and to overcome there needs to be 60 senators in total, and we can only imagine at most Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who are both Republicans, to defect. Besides those two, we don't expect any other Republicans to be in favor of this bill. So unfortunately, there are not enough votes on the Republican side. Democrats need 10 Republicans in order to go for this bill, and there are not 10 Republicans. There may not even be one. So, this goes back to the question of the filibuster, and it makes the argument of removing the filibuster more reasonable. John Tester of Montana, he's a Democrat, and he is now open to removing the filibuster because of the amount of gridlock that is happening, even though Democrats have a trifecta in the government. And more Democrats are jumping on board to it. Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota are now for it. And at this point, only 2 Democrats are against it. Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona and Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Now, I don't know why I keep calling him George. Joe Manchin of West Virginia, we see a reason why he would be against the filibuster. He is a Democrat in a very Republican state. That said, Kyrsten Sinema doesn't have much reason as to why she should be against the filibuster. So, as a result, a lot of progressive Democrats are calling for Kyrsten Sinema's removal. But until 2022, they're not going to be able to pass this bill. The only way they can pass this bill is if they gain 2 seats in the Senate, and they would have to gain at least 2, net gain of 2. So that's the first thing they need to do. The harder thing for Democrats, though, is they have to retain the House. And as I stated earlier, for Republicans, all they need to do is just redistrict seats and gerrymander them to favor them in order to get the majority in the House. And this bill works to prohibit partisan gerrymandering, but if it can't pass before the redistricting happens, then Democrats are essentially just doomed for this bill. So we don't believe that this bill can pass, but it is important to support this bill and to call your local senators to be for this bill, and as well as to call Joe Manchin as well as Kyrsten Sinema to remove the filibuster. So that's our opinion on the For the People Act. So thanks for watching this video. This video is is now adjourned, and we'll see you in the next one.